Hello and welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wade. This is the podcast where we explore population health issues impacting your community. Dissect and Connect is a service of New River Valley Community Services and the Montgomery County Prevention Partners. Melissa McGinn is currently Director of Community Prevention Programs for Greater Richmond Stop Child Abuse Now, or SCAN, and she also serves as State Coordinator for Virginia's Trauma-Informed Community Networks. Melissa is responsible for the management and coordination of all SCAN's prevention programs, as well as training and consultation on becoming a trauma-informed organization. She has also been an adjunct professor and field liaison at Virginia Commonwealth University for 15 years. Melissa previously worked at the Virginia Department of Social Services, reestablishing the Child Welfare Stipend Program at 4 universities across the state. Melissa spent the first 14 years of her career as a child and family therapist, specializing in the treatment of complex trauma, working primarily with children in the child welfare system in community-based and outpatient settings. So Melissa, welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I mentioned in the intro that you work for Greater Richmond SCAN. Can you talk a little bit more about that organization?
Sure. So Greater Richmond SCAN is a large nonprofit in the Greater Richmond region. So we're actually located right in the city of Richmond. Our focus is around the prevention and treatment of child abuse and neglect. We do that through 5 different programs. So we have Child Advocacy Center that serves Richmond and Rico counties and 8 other multidisciplinary teams, so 8 other counties surrounding Greater Richmond. We have a trauma-focused treatment mental health program for youth that are connected with our Child Advocacy Center. We have a therapeutic preschool called Circle Preschool that primarily serves youth who may struggle to be in a typical preschool setting, and many of them have histories of early childhood trauma. We have Richmond CASA, so court-appointed special advocates as part of SCAN. And we have a family support program, which works with parents who are court-ordered and have received charges or are being investigated for abuse and neglect. And then the 5th program is the program that I oversee, and it's our community program. So community programs is the prevention arm of SCAN. So with that, we do a lot of training, consulting around child abuse prevention themes and trauma-informed practice, and do a lot of work in the school system. So we have teams of trauma-informed education specialists who are embedded in several of our local school districts, trying to bring trauma-responsive practice into the classroom. And we also, the Greater Richmond Trauma-Informed Community Network kind of falls under purview as well. So I co-lead that network with my colleague, Lisa Wright.
Okay, fantastic. I mentioned in the intro that you are also State Coordinator of Virginia's Trauma-Informed Community Networks, in addition to being just a mouthful. What is it that you do exactly in that role?
Sure. So Greater Richmond Trauma-Informed Community Network, or we call it the TICN for short. So that the Richmond TICN was the first one of these kind of community networks to be established in the state. And that was back in 2012. And since that time, we've assisted with helping other communities develop these networks. So I've played an integral role in that, with really kind of helping to first convene meetings of the leaders of the different networks from around the state. So back in 2017, we started meeting quarterly, and now we meet every other month. I, along with my colleague Charlotte Yore, put together a biweekly e-note. So it's like an e-newsletter that has lots of information and resources, events, best practice, policy information for kind of all of these networks. I provide just a lot of technical assistance and support and mentorship to the different networks. So especially those that are just getting started. So kind of walking them through kind of the lessons we've learned along the way and the challenges and how we've navigated some of that. Do a lot of just connecting them with other leaders around the state, because each community is so different and unique. Yeah, and just provide just that glue to keep it moving.
Well, you've been a great resource for the recently formed Trauma Informed Network here in the New River Valley, so really appreciate all your help with that. For those listening who aren't familiar with the concept, what does a trauma-informed community look like exactly?
So these networks are these multi-sector collaboratives. So they represent really, part of the motivation to even develop these was really to get people to move out of the silos that we often navigate in. So it was really to have this multi-sector community-led approach. So there's lots of different people and individuals and organizations represented in these systems or in these coalitions. So everything, from school to healthcare to child welfare to the aging population, community, just kind of everyone represented with this common vision of kind of building a more resilient community and doing that through trying to change some of the practices and policies within our systems, how to create, increased level of connection amongst community, share resources and collaborate, bring people together. There's just been a tremendous amount of benefits, but every community needs are very different. So these networks do look different, although they are all across the state in different regions of the state, but they all kind of share some of these common elements of connection, community, inclusiveness, multi-sector, and just having that vision of creating more resilient community.
Well, I'm curious to learn how you specifically chose this particular career path.
So early in my career, about 20 years ago, I was started out as a individual and family therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I have a master's degree in social work from VCU, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So early on, really for the first 10, 12 years, I was doing direct practice primarily with youth who were in the child welfare system. And the majority of my caseload were youth who had significant degree of early childhood trauma, a lot of complex trauma. So the training that I got and just a lot of just the ongoing, education that I received was really around trauma-informed practice. But doing child and family work, you also are involved with a lot of other systems. And I was concerned at the time, especially that a lot of the systems that I interface with weren't always operating from that same lens, not always taking a child or family's history into account when making certain decisions like that. So I kind of started to slowly shift away from doing direct practice and doing more to help improve systems and improve a lot of the other professionals that were involved in these systems. So I've been teaching at VCU for the last 15 years. I was teaching a child and family practice class, so kind of hoping to train kind of the new, crop of clinicians that were coming out around trauma-informed practice. And then I've just done a lot of work kind of with professionals, so kind of shifting away and doing more training with professionals in our community in a variety of systems.
So we're recording this interview in late April, and next week, May 2nd through the 8th, is being recognized as Resilience Week across the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I have a two-part question related to that. First of all, what is resilience as it pertains to trauma-informed communities or trauma-informed care?
Sure. So many different ways to define resilience.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I think about resilience, I think about it in terms of just kind of this ability, to overcome and move through or endure hard things. So we think about the hard things or the experiences that we've had that many of us carry, and some of that can be past trauma or just other things, just to have that, ability to be able to kind of move through it or move with it, and endure. So, obviously resilience and building resilience, so like building individual or community resilience is something that should be really looked at and done and acknowledged all the time. But we wanted to at least, identify 1 week where we can bring even additional awareness to the importance of this topic. And, last year was the first annual Resilience Week, and we were, able to, utilize all these community networks around the state so that this could be something that was really a statewide event and something that could be celebrated within each community, within each individual or organization. And we've even had the governor sign a proclamation acknowledging the week he did last year, and then he actually just signed one yesterday for this coming week. So just to bring more special attention and awareness to this topic. Just think especially during, even just times like this where we think about just how hard this past year has been and this collective trauma that we've all experienced with this pandemic, that it's just important to pause and to reflect, to connect, to take care, during this time. So, having this week kind of set aside for us to do that and to reset and just to remind each other that this is something important and needed, and we really should. Hopefully this will also kind of help jumpstart some of us to getting back to really taking care of ourselves and each other.
Right. I noticed there are several themes connected to this year's observance. Can you talk a little bit more about those and why those were selected in particular? Sure.
So these themes really came out of things that we've been hearing, in our community. So these really were topics that have come up frequently, and we wanted to just, again, bring, special attention and awareness to some of these themes and just ways to build resilience within them. So some of those themes, consist of connection was really one of the first ones, grief and loss. So thinking about just all the loss and grief that we as a collective community have experienced.
Sure.
Some of us more than others this year. Just the pandemic itself, wellness, really around mind, body, and spirit. So just kind of bringing attention to that self-care, diversity, equity, inclusion, thinking about just all that our community has experienced and some individuals, again, more than others. Really, this was just an opportunity for us to be able to have events and have just a lot of different things connected to these themes, and just strategies to build individual resilience within them.
Yeah. So are there any special activities or events planned to coincide with the observance?
So many of the networks that are around the state. There's 29 of them right now in communities around the state. Each network is doing things a little bit different. So some are having a lot of just virtual trainings, panel discussions, film screenings. We have on our website, grscan.com, a whole web page set aside for Resilience Week with a whole event section with links to any of the events that can be attended by anyone in the state. And there's a lot that are on there. So everything from, documentary screenings on the movie Resilience and Walk With Me. The YMCA of Virginia actually is hosting events across the state, family fitness free events. They've filmed a bunch of that, and there's access to that on the site. Number of yoga studios are offering free virtual yoga. There's a number of trainings. So if people want to become more aware about the impact of trauma and resilience, there's a number of just trainings that are on there that are free, from ACE interface training to some on racial trauma and resilience, grief and loss in a global pandemic. I mean, on and on and on. There's just tons. I really encourage people to take a look and set some time to attend at least one of them.
Great. And I will include that information in the show notes for today's episode. You touched upon COVID-19, the global pandemic, and even some of the social unrest that we've witnessed in the past year. With all of that in mind, is it fair to say that our exposure to trauma has increased?
Absolutely. And then for some, just all that we've experienced, it probably also triggers a lot of just things that we may have experienced in the past. But I do believe that there's definitely been kind of a collective trauma, and then in addition to just what we're exposed to, even just on the television, with the constant news cycle and everything, of just, we're almost, re-traumatized or experience that vicarious trauma. But yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, all the more important to take time to reflect and to attend and notice what we've gone through and notice how we're being impacted, notice how our families or our children are being impacted, paying attention really to those signs, and then doing what we need to do to get help and support.
So being resilient doesn't necessarily mean that we ignore the trauma or the things that we've been exposed to in the past, correct?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Has the impact of trauma on children and young people changed during your time in this field?
What I've noticed is there's definitely more awareness to the topic. It's becoming talked about and recognized in a different way than it was when I started almost 2 decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like just today, I was watching the news this morning, and Oprah has a new book out with Dr. Bruce Perry, who we've been to his trainings many times, called "What Happened to You." And it's a book about the impact of childhood trauma. And, so again, there's just a lot more that's coming into the mainstream, more attention to it. We hear even just some of our legislators using terms about it, and I think there's definitely more attention to trauma, childhood mental health services, and the importance of social emotional health. Part of the, or not part, but one of the first goals of our trauma-informed community network was around creating a shared language and understanding of trauma in our community. So we did do a lot of work and outreach to spread awareness about, what are potentially traumatizing events, because there's things that sometimes that we endure that we might not even consider to be potentially traumatizing and can have a long-lasting impact, especially on a child's development. We often think about sometimes of the big T traumas, which are often what you would refer to as child abuse, or neglect. But we don't often think about the smaller T's that can have just as big of an impact. So even just everything from racism and oppression, enduring, just the cumulative impact of trauma exposure on many professionals who are in the field doing work. So a lot of our, first responders or folks who work in child welfare, just the child welfare system in general can be traumatic for individuals who are involved in child. So just having a separation from a family member, a loved one. So there's just a lot of things that I think in the past providers might not necessarily have considered traumatic. And now I think there's a greater understanding of all the layers of things a child often carries with them. And then we can, have better interventions and better treatment.
Yeah. In addition to the language and just kind of being on the same page around what that looks like, what are some ways that individual communities can best address trauma?
I think one is, moving kind of out of these kind of silos and collaborating, so even just the example of having these community networks where you can come together, collectively, not just the healthcare profession or not just the mental health profession or the schools, but come together with this multi-sector approach to kind of share all the things we're hearing and share the resources and the training and the awareness. I think that's an easy first step, but each community is very unique, and the type of trauma and things that a community is enduring is very different.
Sure.
For some, communities, Richmond, there's a high level of community violence, but in other networks, there could be a high degree of parental substance abuse, so it looks very different, but coming together, to start having the conversations is a good place to start.
You mentioned the Greater Richmond Scan website. Are there other resources, books, or other websites, social media accounts that you might recommend to our listeners?
Sure. So on the Scan website, grscan.com, we have a page dedicated to trauma-informed community networks, and we have a whole resource tab that has lots of different links to just a lot of just national research and resources. One site that we use frequently, though, is called PACES Connection. So
okay.
PACES.com. So PACESconnection.com. That is basically just this global clearinghouse of information about adverse childhood experiences, best practice, treatment. And there's over 50,000 people, I think, that are involved in it. That's a great place to go and get started.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll also include a link to the new book from Oprah that you mentioned earlier. And Oprah, if you're listening, you're welcome. Any parting words of wisdom for our listeners, Melissa?
I think, even just, given what we're just a few days out from Resilience Week, and just what everyone has been just collectively carrying, over this last year. I just would encourage people to pause, and if you can, have an opportunity to do something good for yourself, even if it is just for a couple minutes. I encourage folks to try to attend one of these events and just to take care.
All right. Well, I think that's a perfect way to wrap it up. Melissa, thank you again for your time. It's been great.
Great. Thank you so much.
Dissect and Connect is sponsored by Teen Connections, a leadership program through Planned Parenthood South Atlantic that empowers youth with the facts about sexual health and the skills to build stronger, healthier relationships. It's free, totally virtual, and you can earn $100 when you graduate as a Teen Connections peer educator in your community. Join a Teen Connections program from home today. For more information, be sure to check out the show notes from today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Dissect and Connect podcast. To learn more about Montgomery County Prevention Partners, our New River Valley Community Services, be sure to check us out on Facebook or visit nrvcs.org/podcast.